Voltron will be back after these messages. And now, back to Voltron, Defender of the Universe.
Welcome, Voltron fans. This is Mark Morrell, your host for Let's Voltron, the official Voltron podcast. We're here for another exciting review, but we're taking it on a 40th anniversary twist. 40th anniversary of Voltron this year, and I got to welcome my co-host, Greg Tyler.
Hello, Mark Morrell. Hello, viewers and listeners across the universe. Yes, we're going to be reviewing a single episode of Voltron, Defender of the Universe, and the anime episode from which it was adapted. And we can think of no one better to join us to help us review this episode for the 40th anniversary than our often present and always appreciated and welcomed across the universe, our good friend Shannon Muir. Welcome, Shannon, back to the podcast.
Thank you both for having me back for this.
Yes.
For those people who need a little setup, what we're about to do tonight is really episode 3 of a 3-episode arc. I did episodes 1 and 2 with Mark and Greg for episode 201, The Captive Comet and the Little Prince, which I think goes back to 2020.
Yeah.
And we're going to, by getting this in now, not only is it appropriate for the 40th anniversary because of what the topic is, but we will finally neatly match up that arc. So if you have the time, it will benefit you as well to listen to that one and then this one, and you will get the entire arc.
Right.
Shannon, thanks for that setup. And now I feel guilty for not having listened to our previous review session before we recorded tonight.
What's the name of this episode that we are now going to be reviewing?
This is the 41st Lion Force episode of Voltron, Defender of the Universe. If you've been following our more recent reviews, well, if the last one was 4 years ago, none of them have been recent. We've been also mentioning the production number because we became aware of those within the last several years. The production number is 241. It's the episode called There'll Be a Royal Wedding. It was written by Mark Handler, and it originally aired October 24th, 1984. We'll also be comparing and contrasting it with the original Beast King GoLion episode, also episode 41 of that show. It's called Brave Shirogane's Brother, and it originally aired December 9th, 1981.
Why don't we set this up? So we are starting off on Planet Doom. Correct?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yes, indeed.
And we get a long narration at the beginning, which really sets this up nicely for us. Okay? So the narrator says, the evil Lotor had taken a beautiful captive, Princess Ramel. He wanted her for his bride. When she refused him, he ordered his guards to, and then you see it sort of go into live action, fire. And then they start firing towards her.
Right. This is the last bit of footage from the prior episode that I mentioned.
Correct.
Yeah. So they're outdoors in this, suitably creepy environment. And all around Rommel are a bunch of skulls of prior victims of what they're about to have her go through.
Yes. So as the camera, pans, it pans from them firing to almost seeing the firing straight at you and then back down to her again. And you keep on seeing these skulls pile up on top of her. Then you see Lotor saying, that's it. And then the narrator comes back on and says, Princess Ramel was cast into the pit of skulls from which no one had ever returned. So with all those skulls piling up on her, it broke the ground open beneath her and she fell down into this pit.
Yeah. So the first major difference between this and GoLion is that a couple of shots were edited out early on in this episode. And we don't get the narrator recap is different as well, of course, and the dialogue tends to differ quite a bit. But visually, there are shots of the Lotor character, Syncline, dragging Princess Amu to the place where she's about to be shot. And he's dragging her on the ground by the hair. So, needless to say, it was not suitable for American child audiences at the time.
So when it happens that she falls down into the pit, Lotor gloats and he says, "That's her reward for siding with Voltron." And then he tells one of the guards, he says, "Guard, make sure that she's there." So why do you think he did that?
I can say more definitively in the GoLion version what he wants proof of. He wants proof that she was killed. He doesn't want to
yes.
just let it slide. But here they're just like, find her. That's basically what he's saying without saying it. Is he expects to find her dead, but in 1984, you were not saying that on camera.
No. So then we see the guards looking for her, and the one guard says, "If we displease Prince Lotor, it will cost us our lives." And he says, "So dig with everything you've got."
Which I actually thought about this watching it. I thought, okay, in Voltron they're all robots, and it's like it'll cost us our lives. They're rather sentient. That's the same sentiment more or less that's in GoLion, but they're not treated as robots. To have that line come out in the Voltron version is like, okay.
Mm-hmm.
That is really bizarre. And it does seem like in Voltron, both the Lion Force and Vehicle Team episodes, the enemy soldiers are robots when they need to be robots, meaning when something bad happens to them. Otherwise, it can be as ambiguous as they want, I guess. So it seems like they're organic in this context, but who knows?
Right. So we do see Ramel, and Ramel is sort of face down at the bottom of the pit, right?
That's right.
Yes.
Okay. She looks up and she sees a candlelight, and then she sees a person, and she looks at the eyes of that person and she says, "Those eyes, they're wild." And we all know who it looks like. Who does it look like?
My pet dog. No, it looks like Sven.
Yep.
Right. So Sven whispers, "Don't make a sound." And then a heavier whisper, he says, "They'll follow you." And she says, "Who will?" And he goes, "Here they are." So the robot soldiers.
Yeah, they're literally called robot soldiers in the script. Whoops.
Yep.
So they enter the scene looking down into the pit, and they say, "Hey, you," as they saw the candle. And Sven blows the candle out and he says, "Let's go." And then you see Lotor saying at the edge of the cliff, "Bring her back, you idiots. Don't let her get away." And the one guard says, "There's somebody with her. It looks like an Earthling." How would he have been able to tell that was an Earthling?
As opposed to an Erusian or a Pollux-ian or, yeah, who knows?
Yeah, that's like, I had
And
the
it's-
same reaction.
And it's dark. Lotor says, "An Earthling." And he says, "Catch them." And they start running away. And get this, the guard says, "They're running too fast, sir."
That's an interesting line, Phil.
They must be running too fast if Rommel can trip and fall and be picked up by Sven and pulled along, and he has time to open up a couple of boulders to reveal a cavern, hide them inside, close the boulders, and they don't see what happens. The guards don't see what happens.
It's like, yeah, let's scream out our incompetence.
Yeah.
Hi.
Yeah. Maybe the robot batteries were low or something. Who knows?
Yeah, so Sven knew exactly where he was going, and this must have been like a secret kind of thing, because he pulls two boulders apart, goes through, and then tries to get her to go through. Basically, she finally goes through, and then he closed the boulders tight. And does that mean that they're safe?
He seems to think so.
He implies it.
And for what it's worth in GoLion, the character says the same thing. They're safe.
Yep.
Okay. So he says, "Now you're safe, so why don't you get out of here?" And she goes, "What do you mean, get out of here?" "Just what I said. Go away. Get out of my sight."
This entire scene plays entirely differently in GoLion. So
yes,
why
it
don't
does.
so remember, let's put a pin in the fact that they've just entered the cave.
Yeah.
And this is the exchange they're having. And what we'll do is we'll take it to a certain point, and then I'll say, hey, let's hold the phone, go back and play the GoLion version.
Okay.
Yeah, it's so radically different.
So she's taken aback by all this. He just got her into a safe place and now he's telling her to get out of there. So she says, "What's the matter with you? What do you think? I'm crazy. Can't you tell?" He says, "I'm a wild man. I live down in these tunnels eating roots and mushrooms. I'm crazy. I could do anything." Is this just bad acting?
It's the most logical fill to try to make sense of the motions. This is a place where I'd say we should probably flip the script and Greg
Okay.
talk about what's actually going on in GoLion.
Okay.
Okay.
So you may have to put the brakes on here. I'm not sure how far to go, but basically they just get in the cave, and the mysterious person whose identity has not yet been revealed says, "We're safe now that we're in here." The princess, who in GoLion is called Amu, not Romel, Amu says, "Why did you save me?" Then he says, "Because you're willing to fight the Galra Empire." Amu says, "Who are you?" And the mysterious person says, "Someone else who fights the Empire, Ru Shirogane." Okay, so if you've been following GoLion or way back when the very first episodes of the show were reviewed back in 2014?
Yeah.
Ru Shirogane has a very familiar last name, and I am using the pronunciation they use on the show. A lot of people anglicize it to Shirogane, but in any case, he's about to say who he is. He says, "Ru Shirogane, my older brother is Takashi Shirogane, the hero who pilots Blue Lion for the invincible King of Beasts, GoLion." Amu says, "Shirogane? None of GoLion's heroes are named Shirogane." And he says, "What? You don't know of Shirogane of GoLion? You were brought here from a pretty distant galaxy. If you don't know, I'll tell you." And that's where I'll stop.
Okay, because that's the dynamic they're having to deal with. Is in the GoLion version, the younger brother has no idea. It's clearly he's been there for a while. He has no idea what's happened. Where here they're having to explain why he's getting so agitated, meaning Voltron, why he's getting so agitated with Romel.
Yes,
because
and
since he's been turned into the same character, that the logic from GoLion can't play. So they're having to play with that idea he's been there a long time, and that has played with his psychology and his mind and his sense of self. The attempt I think that Mark is trying to make, and I just realized I put words in Mark's mouth, but I've known him for a while, so I'm gonna take this little leap of faith. Is I think he's trying to do his best to convey the mental state using through the mouth movements, because we can't get into Sen's head.
right.
Mm-hmm.
So again, to spell it out overtly and explicitly for everyone, if you're not familiar with the original show, in GoLion, Takashi Shirogane and Ru Shirogane are entirely different characters, and this is the first time that Ru Shirogane has been introduced. In Voltron, the two characters were both adapted as Sven. And so that's why Romel's next line is what it is.
Yeah, so no, I knew I recognized your face. You look different, but... And Sven says, "But what? I was an unknown slave before I ran away to these caves. So if you think you know who I am, well, you must have mistaken me for somebody else." And she says, "No, I didn't make a mistake. You used to be the best navigator in the Alliance. Then you joined the Voltron force." And he's playing crazy now. He's saying, "What are you saying? With a crazy brain like I have, do you think they'd let me join the Voltron force? Now go away." She says, "No, you try to act mean, but you're kind. You're not crazy or you wouldn't have saved me. I know you now. You're Sven, the Blue Lion." And he says, "How dare you? Who do you think you're coming here talking about Sven? There is no Sven." And she says, "Why are you saying that? Because the Sven you speak of is gone. He was nothing but a failure. A failure."
So let's catch up. We had left off with Ru Shirogane introducing himself.
Yeah.
And expressing surprise that Amu does not know Shirogane of GoLion. So Amu says, I am Princess Amu. I am from Heracles, sister planet to GoLion's Altea. Rue says, oh, yeah, Princess? You don't look crazy, but you say you don't know my brother's name. Are you nuts? Amu says, I am Princess Amu of Heracles. I am a distant cousin of Princess Fala, who pilots Blue Lion. I know a great deal about GoLion. Rue says, shut up. GoLion's piloted by 5 brave Earthlings. You big liar. Amu says, big liar. Rue says, that's right, a liar. Blue Lion's brave is my brother Takashi Shirogane. Amu says, Blue Lion. That's right, I heard about this. The brave who piloted Blue Lion met a heroic death at Enerva's hands. Rue says, dead. My brother's dead? That's impossible. How could he be dead? It's a lie, a lie, a lie. And he's crying. He's hearing this news for the very first time.
Right. And that's the flip. That's the exact visual flip to he was nothing but a failure, a failure. He makes that same, sits down and starts crying into his own hands.
Yes.
That's the audio that goes over the 2 different visuals.
Yeah. So I'll stop there.
Right.
So the bottom line is that the visuals have 2 entirely different story contexts. And I'm going to jump the gun here. And I think that for the decision that the producers and writers of Voltron chose to make, I think they did a pretty darn effective job of making this work. Is it awkward as all get out when you know how it plays in GoLion? Yes, but I do think that on its own merits, it's pretty successful.
Yes. Do you agree, Shannon?
I do.
Okay. So Ramel says Sven was no failure. He fought valiantly against one of Lotor's most terrible robeasts. No one can defeat a robeast single-handed, but Sven held him off long enough for the rest of the Voltron force to save the planet. If it wasn't for Sven, the planet Eris would have been lost. But then Sven says, but he lost. He was beaten. Now, this is where he really goes into tears.
Yeah. And so I should point out that as Rommel explains what's going on with Sven, is this the point where they drop in some imagery from to suggest Voltron in combat?
Yeah, there's footage from some of the prior episodes.
So there is a comment here that Mark was about to read. I think it was dialogue, but it basically was suggest DX, and this, I'm assuming this is like stock footage or something. I don't know what DX stands for exactly. Suggest DX to scene from previous episode where Sven fought Robeast and was injured. Allow voiceover to continue over this flashback, then DX. Oh, dissolve. Back to Rommel. Right. Yeah, approximate time added 20.27 seconds. So there's a suggestion in the script of the episode where Sven is injured by the Robeast that he fights way back in, I think, episode 4 or 5 or 6, one of those very early ones. So it is suggesting to use that footage. But what they chose to use in this episode is footage of Voltron and Blue Lion in combat, which suggests that the way Sven was defeated was quite different from the way it actually played out in the earlier Voltron episode. So that's the only oddity that I found in the way that this plays out. But in an episode, but it's easy to editorialize about this 40 years after the fact. In a syndicated television environment where it's one and done until you happen to catch a rerun, if you miss one of these episodes or you happen to forget, the details are not going to stick in a lot of kids' heads. So this sticks out like a sore thumb today, but I don't think it would have quite as much 40 years ago.
Right.
Thoughts?
I definitely agree with you, especially because we weren't as expecting sequential programming or that sense of, or paying that kind of attention to details. Now, that said, I don't know why this is. If for some reason I can't see myself missing 2 episodes in a row, we had a VCR back then. I know that I saw this episode before the 2 that we reviewed in 201. I don't know how they got played out of order in my market, but they did. And so that's one of the reasons that this intro is so nice, because it felt like we were setting this up, and I'm like, what past are we alluding to? And then I forgot how many episodes later, there was the first two that we reviewed, and I'm like, wait a minute, that one goes here. But I know from at least from everything else that I've seen document wise, their scheduled order was correct. And so it only did, I mean, that's what I'm saying is it didn't bother me at the time because it was insular. But when I realized it hooked to the other two, only then did it bother me.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if that it's any help, but that's what it made me think of.
No, I think so. I think
Yeah.
it makes sense.
You know, the part where Sven is now crying, right?
Yeah.
And he says, "Do you know what that's like? I couldn't move. I could hardly breathe." And she said, "But yes, but it wasn't your fault." And he said, "So I still failed." He said, "While I was in the hospital, Zarkon's fleet attacked. It was a small planet. They couldn't defend themselves, and I couldn't help them. I was taken with the others to be a slave on planet Doom. But when they saw I couldn't work, they left me without food or water. I lay there remembering, dreaming. Sometimes I imagined what I saw myself as I used to be."
Yeah. And so the visual imagery here is that he is in a dark like a dark void, and he sees a candle approaching him. And accompanying that candle, it's in the hand of a ghostly visage of his older brother, Takashi.
Right.
That's the visual.
Right.
But here it's him, it's recontextualized as Sven as he used to be, right?
Right.
Right. He's self-visualizing again, going with that whole idea of I'm trying to remember myself who I am, even though I've been beat up. I couldn't help these people because he was set up from the very beginning that he seemed the most dedicated to wanting to do the right thing. That was just something about his character, even though we didn't get to know him very long. He didn't have any of the silly banter like any of the other ones. There was just, there was just that sense about him. So it makes total and complete sense that he'd be like, I'm the perfectionist. I want to put everybody else first and myself last, which is how it feels. But the idea that I couldn't do that his whole idea of self-worth is hinged on that is, again, it's actually kind of, if you think about it in some ways, scarily deep for a kid show of that period.
Yeah.
And that the idea that they were brave enough, I mean, it's truthfully all they could do with that footage, but that they were brave enough to do it is pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, they could have taken this in a totally different direction. They could have followed GoLion, but just indicated that Sven is still injured, he's in a coma, or he's somehow otherwise indisposed. He's in another dimension. He just can't be there. But here's Sven's brother, Bob. They could have done that.
Yes, they could.
But it is really impressive that they did take it in this direction. I think it makes Sven a far more interesting and compelling character.
Yeah. So Sven says, "You must escape from planet Doom." This is his ghostly self.
Yeah.
"Remember, you're part of the Voltron force." And Sven is saying, "How can I escape?" And he says, "Tell me, please." And then he realizes, but then it was just a dream. So he said, "That's when I escaped here to the caves. I'll never be the man I used to be." Says, "Yes, you will, Sven."
All right, so let's pick up. Let's go back to GoLion. So, this is just after Amu has told Rue Shirogane that his brother has died. He says, "It's a lie. It's a lie. It's a lie. Is he really dead?" She says, "I heard he meant his death well." Rue says, "So that's how it is. That's why when I was imprisoned in Demon Castle, he appeared in a dream." And so this is, instead of an image of Sven's past, who he was before all this trauma had happened to him, he sees an image of his older brother. This is Takashi Shirogane saying, "Rue, Rue." Then Rue says, "Bro." It's a Japanese word for it. It isn't literally bro, but that's how it was translated for the English subtitles. Takashi's ghostly image says, "Rue, please defeat the Gaular Empire. Live through this, Rue." Ryu says, "Bro, where are you going?" And then as Takashi's ghostly image fades away, you hear it say, defeat the Galra Empire. Rue calls out, bro, and then he's dead. And then he says, why? Why'd you die? Bro. Rue Shirogane, brother of Blue Lion's brave Takashi Shirogane. And that's pretty much it. So we changed to another scene at that point.
Okay.
What's interesting is that finally getting to see it with the subtitles and see the GoLion version explains something that bothered me in the initial airing, was when he's doing the middle of the voiceover and they put the words, like he says, when I realized it was just, and we actually see him in the flashback mouth the words, a dream, which he could have just said to himself. And I'm like, why would you break the voiceover and actually show him say the last two words? Because he's basically calling out brother as the Vision is leaving. And so Mark does a good job at putting words in there to both finish the narrative sentence and be something the Sven could have logically said in the moment, but visually it was like, why would you need to do that? And now it makes total sense.
So yeah, it does. And so imagine being a Voltron writer. This is Mark Handler who has actually done this. So, when the episode credits air, you see the list of all the writers who are credited for the series at large. And Mark had been added to the credits by this point. But there's no indication in any given episode's end credits who actually wrote a given episode. But through the script, this one was genuinely written by Mark Handler. So imagine any of the writers, any of them for any episode, if they didn't already have the original script, having to write dialogue that fits the lip flaps and the visuals of the episode as a whole and have it make any sense at all. And now when you have something this context filled, where you are taking a scene for reasons that we will probably never know, a decision was made to keep Sven around. Maybe it was just they didn't have to say that he died in that episode when he died. And then maybe the Voltron writers like, oh crap, how do we cover ourselves here? Because now we see visuals of Sven and this guy who looks just like him. What do we do? I know, let's say that it's Sven. And imagine having to recontextualize this entire scene and get the lip flap to work and all that and have it make sense in a new context. That would be so difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, totally. And then to still keep the emotional investment, because there is definitely in the GoLion version that heavy emotional investment, because you're watching a character learn that his brother has died. How do you do the same thing when that's not what you can or intend to do?
Right.
I mean, this particular sequence, I mean, we happen to know who wrote it because we have the script, but I've always felt whoever got handed this, long before I knew that what we know now, had a huge challenge that they had in front of them, and I do feel they met it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. In the Voltron version, Ramel says, "You must lead me to the surface of the planet. Will you help me?" And Sven, shaking, says, "I could try, but I don't think I can do it." And she's thinking to herself, he's got to do it. The fate of my people depends on it. And then they go to a commercial break.
Yeah, and so in GoLion, there's an episode. There are some scenes that are cut from the Voltron episode, and they primarily involve Princess Amu's younger brother Alor, who in Voltron is called Bandor. And so there's a whole scene coming up here, and it's not super insightful, except that it happens to take place on the planet Altea with the GoLion team and Alor standing at the actual grave of Takashi Shirogane.
Oh, yes.
And so, I mean, they're basically because Amu is gone and they don't know what in the world they're completely in the dark about what's going on the planet Galra right now. They don't know about Rue Shirogane finding Amu or any of that. They don't even know if she's still alive. So they're basically in prayer. They're basically reaching out to Takashi Shirogane's spirit to ask for guidance. And because of the visuals of the scene where it's very clearly a memorial for Takashi Shirogane, it's pretty clear why this entire scene was cut from Voltron.
And it was 25 seconds long.
Yes, that too.
Which then, what was it, about 20 seconds they said for that added battle footage for the dissolves? Was it a swap for time? Put it in the flashback.
Plus or minus, yeah, pretty much.
So I just wanted to remind everybody when they went to commercial breaks, they had an image of Voltron and it said Voltron will be back after these messages. And then when they would come back from the commercials, they would say, and now back to Voltron, Defender of the Universe.
Ah, yes. Like comfort food.
Okay. So now we're back and they're on the surface of Planet Doom. And even Sven is saying, this is the surface of Planet Doom. And Ramel says, what's that alarm? Because there's an alarm going off. And Sven says, some of the slaves have stolen one of Zarkon's ships. Well, is that fortuitous or what?
Mm-hmm.
How does this happen?
I just presume that they've popped out, and it's just yes, their timing is such that he's having to explain to her maybe this has been going on. She doesn't know what's been going on, but that's not what's going on in GoLion at all. They're very aware of what's going on.
Yeah, and GoLion, Rue and Amu had helped these slaves escape off screen. And so these are people from Amu's planet. So in Voltron, the planet's called Pollux. It's called Heracles in GoLion. And basically, it's off screen. They've helped these folks escape. And Amu thanks Rue for helping her people escape. He says, I didn't do it for Heracles. It's a battle of revenge for my brother. No need to thank me. And then she's angry and says, that's true. You're fighting for your own sake. You're cooperating because we happen to have the same enemy. That's it, huh? Rue says, that's it. I'll just say this. I'm at war. If you've got time to chatter, spend it keeping an eye on our perimeter. And then she says, I know that. You don't need to tell me. He says, well, good.
Basically, the alarm sounds. You see robot guards yelling. There's a reddish object up in the sky. I assume that's the ship.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And Ramel says, we could do the same thing. Let's call the Voltron force. And Sven says, I told you I won't call them. I can't call them. Don't you understand? He says, I let them down. And Ramel says, I gave you that transmitter because you're the only one who knows the codes. You must put aside your personal problems and call Castle Control. He says, personal problems? This is your problem. I'm just a wild man who lives in the caves. I don't have to do anything. And Ramel says, I know you don't mean that. She says, if you have any honor, you'll call them. And he says, I regret this, as he calls them.
Yeah.
What's amazing is there's two different conversations going on there. One is a bit more hard-cutting than the other, which is the GoLion one. But the ultimate impact is the same. The two of them are essentially, as the cliche goes, basically fighting like an old married couple, and they haven't gotten to know each other that long. I mean, just the way that they're going at it. It's accurate, but yet it's like boom.
What's very interesting is I think at least the events, maybe not the dialogue, but the events of Voltron are actually a little more interesting in that, well, I don't know. They each have a different angle. In the GoLion version, Rue and Amu helped the Heraclean people escape in the ship. In Voltron, they just happened to witness it. And then Ramel says, hey, this is a good idea. We should try doing this too. That's so. One thing I do like about it is that it at least offers an explanation about, hey, let's try this. And spoilers, they're going to try it. But in GoLion, he's helped one group of people escape, and now let's us try to escape. And they're both repetitive. They have a different angle and a different sense of agency. And which one's better or worse? That's it's up to the individual, I guess.
Okay, so when Sven calls them, he says, come in, Castle Control. Are you there? Please copy this code, N1411008K0. Request clearance for Princess Ramel. And you see the Voltron force back on Eris. Okay? And you see Karan, you see Keith, you see Bandor and Alora. And Karan says, it's him. Keith says, it's Sven. Bandor says, somehow he found my sister. And Alora says, she's my cousin, too.
Oh gosh, okay, that was one of those. Okay, A, we don't know what to put in the mouth, and B, in case you missed all the other episodes, here we're gonna throw that in to make this clear to you.
You could tell that was forced for the audience because, of course, everybody else who was around her knew that.
Right. Plus, her mouth's moving. What else are we going to say? You know?
So Lance says, Roger, tell them wherever they are, we'll find them.
All right, so that's where that cuts off. Here's
Right.
what happens in GoLion. He pulls out the communicator and says, come in, GoLion Braves. I'm Brave Shirogane's little brother, Ryu Shirogane. I've rescued Princess Amu, and then at the castle, Ribal, the Karan character, says, Shirogane's little brother? And Kogane, Keith, says, he's still alive. Alor, who's Bandor, says, my sister's been saved. And Fala here just says, this is such good news. Then Kurogane, the Lance character, says, but will Syncline just let all this slide? So now we're caught up to Voltron.
Cool. So we're back to Lotor's quarters, and there's a guard entering the quarters, and the guard says, Prince Lotor, some renegade slaves have stolen one of our ships. They slipped through our security system. It was a mistake. It won't happen again. And of course, guess who's there with Lotor? Hagar.
Mm-hmm.
So Hagar says, fool, Prince Lotor doesn't like mistakes. Do you think she would just say that and nothing would happen to the guy?
In this
You would
show?
think something should.
Yes. In Voltron? Yeah.
So did anything happen to the guy in GoLion?
Maybe.
Mm.
Now, I don't have a script here. I'm actually looking at the subtitles of the episode, so I don't have the action to go with it, so I'm going to go on memory with the action, and please jump in if you remember more than I am. The guard says, Prince Imperial, we investigated the area where the transmission was sent, but we were unable to locate Princess Amu. Syncline, Lotor says, imbecile, you think you've carried out your duties? And then something happens to the guy. Basically, Syncline gets out his sword and slashes the guard to death.
Mm-hmm.
Then Anerva, Hagar, says, but to think Shirogane had a brother. So now we're caught up to where another thing happens, and we're caught up to Voltron.
See, this is the value of having Mark Handler as the writer here, because I mean, she was saying something contextually completely different.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think and Hagar has that kind of in your face sarcastic wit a lot of time, and I think her line there fit her character quite well.
Yeah. Another guard says, Prince Lotor, our pursuit craft has located the runaway slave ship, sir. And Lotor says, blast it out of the sky. And then Hagar says, that sounds nice, but why waste a shipload of slaves? Bring them back and we'll have some fun. Lotor says, Captain, bring the slaves to me. And the guard says, I understood.
Yeah. So back to GoLion.
Yeah.
The Galra agent pops on the screen and says, Prince Imperial, we've discovered the transport ship stolen by the Heraclean prisoners. Syncline says, turn every one of them into space debris. Anerva says, just a moment, please. I've thought of good bait to lure out Princess Amu. Bring the transport back to Galra. And the Galra soldier says, aye. So
Okay.
here we go.
Great.
A bit more foreshadowing where it's going to go versus keeping the audience. This is one place where I actually like the Voltron version better, because it's like, no, bring them back here. I have an idea without being blatant what that idea is. Where in GoLion, she says, I know exactly what I'm going to do. And you're like, okay. Whereas Voltron's like, okay, what do you have in mind, Witch? And then we see.
I will say this. I think a lot of people sell Voltron short. When they watch GoLion and Die Rugger, and kind of say, well, those original stories were so much better. Now, I will say this: the adaptations are Voltron are kind of clunky in a lot of places where they just didn't have the context, and at the incredible pace at which they had to write these episodes and produce them, there are bound to be areas that fall a little short of what we might expect as grown-up fans today. But I do not think that either series is inherently better or worse in terms of the quality of the story. What are your thoughts?
My feeling is that, I mean, every show is going to have individual episodes will have hits and misses, and that's just inherent to any show. It just, when I made that particular statement, I was referring to, I just happened to like the way this particular scene was handled in this particular case. That doesn't make the whole episode bad or good. It's just, I'm like,
yeah,
I happen to like that particular setup better, but
yeah, I wasn't trying to extend your comment to assume what you thought of the episode as a whole, but just in general, I mean, the plots are often pretty similar, obviously, because the visuals are the same in most cases, but you know, the characters are obviously, the brutality is toned way down in Voltron. I prefer that myself. Are there certain story points that make a lot more logical sense just because the writers actually in GoLion or Die Rugger actually were, you know, they steered the scripts, whereas Voltron had to steer the scripts constrained to a set of visuals and didn't always have scripts to start from the anime. So there are definitely some misses sometimes from that in terms of coherence and things like that. But I still don't think that one show is necessarily better from a story perspective than the other. What are your thoughts, Mark?
So thinking about how we had been talking to some of the producers before, and they said they told us that they did have some episodes where they had the translations and some where they didn't. In this particular one, do you think they had it or they didn't have it?
That's a good question.
Tough call because of the amount of rewriting that was done on it. And if they had it, would it matter?
Right.
In this case.
Yeah, because Sven lived in the Voltron narrative.
Yeah. I'm thinking they didn't have it. That's where my mind goes. I don't really think they had the translation for this one.
If I had to guess based on reviewing parts 1 and 2, like I said, this is part of an arc, I would say you're right, because there's some things between describing the spirit at the end of the universe. Go back to episode 201 if you don't know what I'm talking about. How that spirit is handled between episodes 1 and 2. That's not always consistent. So yeah, that's my my thought is for the sequence they probably didn't.
I'll just say I that's probably true. I'm hesitant to say I believe 100% certainty that they didn't, but I will say that in my humble opinion, no, I'm not humble. I think Voltron was the better for it in this episode. I do think that the additional depth to Sven that was given to him, whether it's by them not knowing what in the heck to do and having to make it up from whole cloth, or choosing to go a different direction because in the Voltron narrative, Sven never died. I think this Voltron episode is stronger than this aspect of this episode is better than the GoLion one, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. We're on the slave ship now, okay, and I mean we're on the stolen ship that the slaves are on.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, and they show a sort of middle-aged man that says they're right behind us. And then the camera pans off to a second person who's another middle-aged man who says, listen, everyone. And then they show more shots of the slaves that are on the ship, and you see a lot more younger female slaves. And one says, we must be brave. And the other one says, I'm trying, but it's hard. And that was Slave 2. That was Lenny Weinrib, right?
Oh,
yes,
okay.
yes.
That's interesting because that's the more important one, GoLion wise.
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't have them labeled by appearance. I just wrote in my notes Heraclean. So they're just different the very people you just mentioned.
Yeah,
The first, yeah, the first slave says, the first male slave says, "We're not going to make it." The second one says, "We can't escape Galra." The first female slave says, "We've come so far too," and the second one says, "Damn you, Galra." One of them says, "If we're taken back to Galra, we're sure to be killed." Yeah. So I
right.
don't remember who said what, but that's how it played out in dialogue.
So what you do see is one of the Drool commanders in his ship. They set a tractor beam towards the transport and they capture it, and now it's in the tractor beam. Right? Okay. And then that first slave says, "They've got us." And then the guard says, "Bring them back to Lotor and King Zarkon." You see some of the slaves are starting to cry now because they're captured again.
Yeah.
Here's some parts of the script that kind of got a little bit confusing for me.
Okay.
Because there was a slave that said, "Why won't they leave us alone?" And then a little bit later, it looks like it comes after the Zarkon part. You know what I'm saying? Like in the script, it was written that she would say this before Zarkon speaks. And then it's after that you actually hear that.
Yeah.
All right.
Get edited sometimes.
I think I know what. I don't have the script in front of me, but that female slave in the GoLion version, that's why I said significant, is she's crying and then there's a dissolve through to her face on Doom.
Yeah.
And then it cuts up to Zarkon.
Okay.
If I remember the correct order. So they may have played with the order and the notes may be a little funky on the page. That's my guess, Greg. You have it in front of you and you have the GoLion subtitles in front of you.
I don't have notes about who said what visually on the characters, but I will definitely take your word for it. I don't recall with certainty. But basically, just to play catch up, the Galra refer to the tractor beams as anchors. They are physical anchors, seemingly, in the GoLion version. So same visuals recontextualized in a small way. There, one of the slaves says, "Such a pity." Another one says, "I don't want to die. I don't want to die." I think that's when they dissolve to that same person on Galra.
Okay.
So, but this is a bit of a confusing thing in both Voltron and GoLion. We've now moved back to Planet Doom or Galra,
Right.
and the slaves are all captured, and Sven and Rommel are hiding among them. Now, how they got there is not explained in Voltron, and it's not explained in GoLion. They're just there.
Yeah. So they're basically in a holding area.
Yeah.
Just on the surface of the planet. And King Zarkon is looking on them from the top of a cliff. And he says, "Do you think Princess Rommel could be hiding among the slaves?" And Hagar says, "Believe me, sire, if she's down there, we'll flush her out." And Hagar says, "I've created this little toy especially for that purpose. It's called the Iron Maiden." So there's this giant robot standing in that same area with the slaves down at its feet, basically.
Yeah. So just really quickly going to the GoLion version of this exchange. Dibazal, who's the Zarkon character in GoLion, says, "What kind of show's about to begin, Unnerva?" And Unnerva says, "Enjoy the view, Majesty. Watch as the goddess of hell sheds the blood of the prisoners."
Yeah, definitely needed to change that beast's name.
Yeah,
Iron Maiden works.
Yeah, so they every time they talk about it in the show in Voltron, it's Iron Maiden.
Yes.
But still in the script they referred to it as the goddess of hell.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Now that's interesting, and for a phrase that specific, if they had it in Japanese, for them to know it in the script, maybe they did have a translation.
Maybe they did. Maybe they did. Okay. So after she introduces the Iron Maiden, Zarkon said, "This better work. I plan to invade Princess Rommel's home planet Pollux, but she knows the key to their secret defense system. If she returns home, we'll never be able to conquer that planet." Really? Zarkon saying he wouldn't be able to conquer a planet?
That is, I've got a lot of lip flap. We need to justify why Zarkon is standing here and why he's moving his mouth. So let's just fill it in with crap about a secret defense system.
Well, it's an interesting twist because we spent the last 2 episodes with the whole thing about Lotor wanting to marry Rommel to get in that way, and when that didn't work to take over her planet, Zarkon must be like, "This is the only other way to go because like my son can't manage to do this." So that's that they're also having to justify why Zarkon is bothering after Lotor not pursuing. That's how I look at it. Because,
Yeah,
yet it is kind of out of the blue. We never mentioned anything about codes in the prior 2 episodes.
yeah. And Sven does mention that she's got some kind of information, but he doesn't get into the specifics of what that is. And this is where we hear what it is. Just to very quickly catch up, Dibazol says, Unnerva, I'd very much like to see the goddess of hell shed the prisoner's blood. Unnerva then says, before she does that, she desires a beautiful woman as sacrifice. Her name is, and then we cut to the cell where the slaves are. And so now I think we're caught up with Voltron at this point.
Okay. And at this point, you see the slaves in the holding area, and Rommel is being hidden by a cloak. And Sven moves into the scene and he says, "You better be careful. They want you." And then you see Lotor with King Zarkon and Hagar, up above saying, "All right, you slaves, we know that Princess Rommel is hiding among you. If you hand her over, we'll spare your lives." So she's starting to get the notion that she should reveal herself. He says, "Rommel, there's no hope. Unless you want to watch us crush these slaves, you must come out and show yourself. The choice is yours. This is your last chance." And Sven is whispering to her. He says, "What will you do?" And she says, "I have to show myself to them." And then the second slave says, "Rommel, don't do it." And he says, "They won't spare us, even if you do turn yourself in." So even the other slaves are telling her not to reveal herself.
Yeah, if I remember visually, those 2 slaves are the older man who was basically in the pilot seat of the ship, and the other female slave that was female slave number 1.
Yep.
That's who I think those 2 are.
So I'm going to catch up real quick. I'm going to skip all the stuff between that Sincline says and back and forth because it's effectively the same. But from this, when Sven says, "What will you do?" In GoLion, Ryu says, "That's dirty." Amiu says, "I cannot allow them all to die." And the Heracleans say, "Princess Amiu, you mustn't come forth. The things Sincline says are lies." So again, it's essentially the same stuff.
Okay, so what really happens to each of these? Because in this script, it mentions the fact that a whip is lashing out at the slaves.
Yeah, and there are a bunch of little lines drawn around certain sections of this script, and the notation is I've become familiar with it from looking at past scripts. Usually handwritten out to the left are the words "edit out" for content. Now the words are not present in this script, but the boxed lines, the three framing lines are, which suggests that a whole lot of this stuff was cut, and we know that from having watched GoLion that there's a bunch of violent stuff that gets that is trimmed from Voltron.
Mm-hmm. King Zarkon says, "I've taught you well, my son. Never show too much mercy." And Lotor says, "Of course not, father. Now watch as I test this new weapon." So Hagar raises her walking stick gleefully and cackles and says, "Yalla." And that activates the Iron Maiden.
Yeah, and above the word, in parentheses, it says magic pronouncement. So this is a magic word, but you don't hear her say a whole lot of magic words in Voltron, so it's a little jarring to hear it out of context here. But whatever.
Yeah, for some people who are watching this, and especially kids, they were probably thinking she's just yelling out instead of saying an actual word like "yalla."
Yeah. Now, the exchange in GoLion, it has a different tone, Dibazal, the Zarkon character, says, Prince Imperial, what are you waiting for? Hurry up. He's not proud of his son. He's impatient. And Sincline says, let the prisoner's lifeblood enter the breast of the goddess of hell. And Minerva says, go.
Okay. The giant Iron Maiden basically sweeps in and grabs some of the slaves, right?
Yeah.
Now, we don't see a whole lot other than just them yelling as they're being grabbed, right?
Right.
And we really come to the end of the first act here with this happening.
Yeah.
Okay. So what really happens in GoLion to the end of the first act?
Well, the act breaks are different in GoLion because they pretty much stop at the halfway point. This is roughly where the GoLion episode breaks. But it's the same action, but there's a lot of screaming and it's a lot more horrific. The stuff that is implied in Voltron is less implied and more overt in GoLion.
Right. As we come back for Act 2, we still see more of the Iron Maiden just sweeping in and grabbing slaves, sometimes two at a time, sometimes one. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But you don't see what happens to them in Voltron.
Yeah, and that's okay.
Right. Mm-hmm. I mean, we kind of know because of what was said in the dialogue, and that's how they dealt with it. They said to tell us what was going on, but they don't show. Whereas GoLion makes it a bit more clear, like you said.
Yeah, and as Sven and Ramel are watching this, Sven starts to cry and says, "Now you know why I went crazy. I watched their cruel."
Sorry, because we're talking about things that fit. I mean, that makes sense. I'm sorry to interrupt you, though.
That's okay. He says, "I watched their cruelty again and again and could do nothing. Nothing to stop them."
And in GoLion, Ryu says, burn this deep into your eyes, this atrocious spectacle. This is the Galra way. So
we see a couple of the slaves. The second slave says, never give in to them. The first one says, fight them to the last. Ramel says, I can't allow this. And she weeps. And she says, I must show myself to them. And Sven says, you are needed on your planet. You are the only one who knows the key to the secret defense plan that can save millions of your people. You must get back to them. And very quickly in GoLion, we see the Heracleans in the clutches of the Iron Maiden, screaming out things like "Long live Heracles! Long live Princess Amu!" Amu says, "It's cruel, too cruel. I can't just let this happen to them." Ryu says, "Endure it. That's your duty. Watch it. Take a good look. It's your obligation to fulfill the requests of your people. We have to bring down Galra." So as you see these people screaming, all of a sudden, Lotor says, tomorrow you'll get more. What? They just stopped the whole thing and then, I guess we'll come back again to this tomorrow. That was kind of strange to me.
They were trying to explain, we have some bait left. We didn't work today. Don't think we're giving up yet. That's what he's trying to say, but without additional context. In GoLion, all the people that the Iron Maiden had attacked are dead. So they're done. I mean, the Galra have finished doing what they set out to do. They're trying to threaten the Heracleans who were still in the cell by showing them what will happen to them if the princess does not show herself. So, it's the same basic thing. It comes across as more a lot more threatening in GoLion because of what we've just seen happen to the people that the Iron Maiden or the Goddess of Hell went after. Sincline's words are a lot more harsh. Let's just put it that way. So Sven basically, I'll skip the word, but he's pretty mean in how he refers to Amu.
where Sven starts saying, if we wait till tomorrow night, we're finished. Ryu says, this is Galra we're talking about. We can't just do nothing. They're sure to find us. Before that, we'll all escape. Yeah, I think I'm caught up with you now.
Yeah, Sven had said basically they'll never expect us to steal another ship.
Yeah. But you know what? But you know what? It actually works because in GoLion, he helps the people escape, and here they just start doing it.
Yeah.
And in GoLion, it honestly feels more repetitive because you're just watching them to go to where another ship is. But here they actually just call it out. They'll never expect us to steal another ship. It's funny, but it acknowledges the inherent absurdity of the visuals.
Right. So Sven says, Princess Ramel will be with us. Ramel says, yes, it's a great risk, but at least this way we have a chance. Are you with me? And then the slaves all say, for freedom and the Galaxy Alliance. All right, let's go. Sven runs, Ramel runs. Sven moves behind a rock formation, and they've got Ramel and a couple of the slaves. And Sven says, that's where they keep them. And those robot guards are specially programmed. They can hear the slightest sound. And one of the slaves says, I'm ready. And the other one says, so am I. And Sven says, we can do it. Quickly and quietly, like cats. Ramel says, I'll go first. Wish me luck. You've got to go just at the right moment. And Sven says, when they turn. So Ramel runs silently into the scene. And then the robot guard's feet stop. And then she goes. And then a little bit later on, you see Sven and the rest of the slaves go.
I just play catch up with GoLion. Very similar, honestly. Amu says, we'll stand up to safely reach the Heracles and defeat Galra. The one thing that's present in GoLion and not in Voltron is we now know where they're going to go, which is Amu's homeworld of Heracles. They don't flat out say in Voltron that they're going to go to Pollux. So that's really the only real add. The dialogue is a little different. Instead of the whole thing about, they turn around, you can slip past them, all that good stuff. Ryu says one place looks doable, as in one place to get to the hangar. One place looks doable if we're willing to die. It's sink or swim. Want to try it? And the Heracleans all say, yeah, let's. And Ryu says, no hard feelings even if you die. Cool. Amu says, Heracleans do not fear death. And Ryu says, listen, go for it when the guards turn their backs. That's it. And now we're caught up.
Okay. So at one point they start to hear laser fire, and Sven yells out, laser fire, run. They get to a hallway, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. We see robot guards of Galra getting blown away as they're running toward the ship, basically. Okay,
yeah. And then Sven says, hurry, I think it's this way. And Ramel, look here. And they're calling this King Zarkon's transport ship?
It's just a ship.
Interesting.
It's just a ship, okay.
Yeah, it is just a ship, but I think that his ship that shows up later on in the series looks very similar.
Okay. So the slave says they're attacking, and then the first slave says, then we'll attack them first with sticks, bare hands, anything we've got. And then Sven says, run for the ship. And then you see the armed slaves running at the robot guards.
A whole bunch of stuff is edited out.
Right.
From GoLion.
Mm-hmm. And Ramel says, I can't leave them. I can't. And then Sven says, they're doing their part. You must do yours. So basically at this point, the slaves are giving themselves up so that Ramel can get on the ship.
Right.
Yes. In GoLion, I'll skip the dialogue really because it's the same basic struggle. The difference is that the Galra soldiers are not robots; they're Galra, they're organic, and anyone who doesn't make it to the ship is killed on screen, and you see it in GoLion.
Right. the implication of Voltron is just the idea that the people who stay behind are going to be recaptured. Not that there's anything worse is going to happen to them.
Right. So Ramel, as she goes in the door, she says, someday we'll come back and we'll free all the slaves on planet Doom. And then she runs into the ship.
Yeah, Amu's line is, thank you, everyone. I swear I won't let your deaths be for nothing.
That's why she's in absolute tears, is
Yeah.
that level. So they're trying to play the sacrifice level the same. And it does work on screen, but to know that's what the GoLion dialogue was, it's like, okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So they're on the transport ship. The engines activate. It takes off from the flight deck. And Sven says, we're on our way. And then I guess you see Keith getting into Black Lion. And he says, we're on our way too.
Yep.
And then you see him, after all the pilots have gotten into their Lions, he says, position keys. And then you see the key, come into and they do that whole sequence where it lights up and everything. And then Keith says, all right, team, let's form Voltron. He says, form feet and legs, form arms and body, and I'll form the head.
So this sequence is entirely, this sequence of Voltron is completely different than the sequence of GoLion in the episode. So in the GoLion episode. In Voltron, yes, you're seeing an abbreviated version of the Lion launch sequence followed immediately by the alternate version of Voltron forming. It's the one that takes less time. It has a little bit of a less flashy look to it than the normal sequence that we see. In GoLion, there's no dialogue. You don't see the Lions launch. You see them combined the traditional way. And there's a narrator saying, after hearing from Ryu Shirogane, GoLion headed for Heracles right away. So it's an entirely different sequence, which I assume it helps to cover up some of the edits and pad out the time a little bit.
So now we're on Lotor's ship, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And he says, so she wouldn't have me, but she'd run away with some slave. And Hagar says, he's not just a slave. He's a member of the Voltron force. That's why Voltron is on his way to protect them, which makes me very happy because I have a little surprise waiting for him. And Lotor says, oh, what surprise? Hagar says, the Iron Maiden Robeast, when it gets through with him, Voltron will be nothing but a bunch of bolts and microchips floating through space. Lotor says, all right, Hagar, prepare your Iron Maiden.
All right. So real quick, GoLion. Sincline says, damn you, Princess Mu, you dare to escape. So he doesn't really care who she escaped with. Minerva says, being angry will not resolve anything. Look, GoLion is headed for Heracles thanks to her tip. We'll take this chance to lay waste to Heracles for good. Sincline asks, by what means? Minerva says, take the goddess of hell with you. Drinking the blood of the living isn't her only ability. She's sure to beat GoLion. Sincline then says, we're launching a full-scale assault on Heracles as of now. All right, we're caught up.
Okay. So now we're on Bandor's ship and outer space. And we hear Lance saying, we've established radio communications. Prince Bandor, go ahead. So Prince Bandor says, Ramel, it's you. Ramel says, yes, my dear brother, I'm coming home. Sven says, Keith, my friend, it's so good to hear your voice again. And Keith says, same here, Sven, we've missed you. Alerted, Alora looks down at her monitor, and Alora says, wait, I'm picking up something on my scanner. It must be Lotor's fleet. So we see outer space, and we see Lotor's command ship flying across the scene. We're on the bridge of Lotor's command ship, and Lotor says, Voltron, this mission will be your last. And then we're on the bridge of Bandor's ship, and an image of Keith materializes on his monitor, and Keith says, Prince Bandor, we're counting on you to back up Voltron. Bandor says, you've got it, Keith.
All right, let's cut back to GoLion. Instead of Lance having the voiceover where he addresses Bandor, a narrator is actually speaking. It says, meanwhile, thanks to Ryu Shirogane's report, Prince Allure, GoLion, and Princess Amu were meeting up near Heracles. Allure, Bandor's character, says, "Sister, you're safe." And Amu says, "This is all thanks to Shirogane's help." Ryu says, "As of today, I'm with you guys in place of my brother." Kogane, Keith says, "As a comrade, so together we can defeat Galra." Fala, the Allura character, says, "Kogane, Galra fleet on approach from 60 degrees left." Sincline says, "Hello, GoLion. Looks like your number is finally up." Kogane says, "Prince Allure, you protect the transport ship and make for Heracles." Allure Bandor says, "Yes, understood." So now we're caught up. And actually, so Keith told Bandor to back up Voltron. And here, Kogane tells Allure to protect the transport ship that Ryu and Amu are on. So he tells them completely different things, but it doesn't really matter in the long and the way the episode plays out.
Right. So now Lotor says all ships move into double claw formation. Do we know what double claw formation really was in this?
I don't. Does Greg?
No idea.
And then he says, "Now unleash the Iron Maiden." And the guard says, "Yes, sir." We see the Iron Maiden launching, and then Princess Allura saying, "We're picking up a large object approaching at high speed from Lotor's fleet." Keith says, "Stand by, team. I don't like the looks of this. Get ready for some major motion." And then the whole Voltron force says, "Let's go." And Keith says, "Fire heat beams." So they fire heat beams at this thing. And then all of a sudden you see it start to like crack apart. The whole Voltron force is thinking, well, this was really an easy battle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pidge says, "Looks like we got her." And Hunk says, "Some roe beast." Lance says, "Yeah, more like a paper tiger." And then Allura says, "Wait, it's cracking. There's something underneath." Keith says, "All right, team, here comes round two." I guess what we had seen before was more like a silverish thing.
Mm-hmm.
And now most of the parts except for the face are now gold, including a crown and the rest of the body.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the cracks fall apart on the face and you see a gold face now. Then you see the crown lift off of the robot, and then it lands on top of Voltron's head.
Yep. And I'm going to skip the GoLion dialogue up to this point because it's basically variations on a theme. Instead of the only difference is, of course, this is the goddess of hell in GoLion, and when it cracks apart, they refer to it as a mecha beast man. Which, if you've been following GoLion, they were originally the original Beastmen that GoLion fought were called Death Black Beastmen, and then about midway through the series, they began to introduce these upgraded ones called Mecha Black Beastmen. So the Goddess of Hell is an example of one of those tougher creatures.
Correct.
Right. So when this gold crown comes on top of Voltron, all of a sudden it sends out electricity through, and Allura's got it in pain. It says it's got us. And then you see like this energy rope encircling Voltron all the way up and down Voltron. And then you see them start to fall, and Hunk says, "We're falling." And then each of them, gasps or yells in pain. And then Bandor yells out, "Voltron, no, no." So then Lotor's fleet begins firing on Bandor's ship. And Lotor says, "More firepower, blast Prince Bandor." That's it.
The dialogue is different in GoLion, but the fundamentals are the same. There's nothing really much to say here.
So you see it hit Bandor's ship, and it's starting to smoke and everything. And the guard says, "Sire, he's completely out of commission." And Lotor says, "Good, let's watch the Iron Maiden finish off Voltron." They keep on showing Voltron's energy crystal.
Mm-hmm.
And Princess Allura says, "Our energy crystal's gone out of control." Then we focus in on the bridge of the stolen transport ship with Sven and Ramel. So Sven says, "It's beating Voltron." Ramel grabs the control stick and clicks it, pulls it back, and then Sven says, "What are you doing?" Ramel says, "I'm going to save Voltron with your help." She says, "You will be my navigator." And Sven is scared, but he says, "No." And she says, "You must keep me on target." She says, "Just call out the space coordinates." Sven says, "All right, I'll try it. It's been so long, but here goes." And then you see Sven saying, "Coming in at X37, 14B and leveling, L91 and dropping to Atom 4, bank to cruise level at Onyx 7, increase velocity, code E 211.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah. I wonder what it was like for them to record that.
Oh, my Lord. Oh, and you got to get it to time.
And he's
You got
doing
to
it.
sail that in 13 and a half seconds.
And he's doing it with the Sven accent.
Oh, my Lord.
Yeah.
Coming into Dex 37, 14B and leveling L91 and dropping to Adam 4, back to cruise level at Onyx 7 and increase velocity to code E211.
Oh, crap. I was 2 seconds too slow.
See? Can you imagine how many times you'd have to do that over and over again?
Oh, my Lord. Kudos to Michael Bell.
Yes. Kudos to Michael Bell. Sven says 103, 102, 101, and we're on target. Ramel's line. Okay, you got it. Sven, I knew you could still do it.
So going back to the ship, this is now Ryu, Shirogane, and Princess Emu. Ryu says, "What are you doing?" to the princess. She says, "At this rate, GoLion is done for. We'll ram it and save them." Ryu says, "What?" Emu says, "If GoLion loses, we'll never be able to beat Galra." Ryu says, "I hear you." And the GoLion, our heroes in GoLion, basically try to tell off Ryu and Emu. They don't want them to sacrifice themselves. I mean, it's clear that what's going to happen here is that they're planning to ram the goddess of hell. So what's very interesting here is the difference in the level of this is basically Emu going it alone, and Ryu is basically along for the ride. Whereas in Voltron, Rommel makes the decision to do it, but they have to work together to make it happen. This is why at the very beginning of the episode, Rommel reminds Sven that he was the best navigator in the Alliance because she needs to leverage that skill here. So there was a setup and payoff, which was nice to do in all the dialogue they had to add for this episode. It's because Sven was such a good navigator that he could do all that Atom 4 Onyx 7 malarkey. But it works. But what's interesting is that Emu does it completely on her own in GoLion.
Is it entirely understood what her intentions are in this scene in Voltron?
No.
No, because they've played it entirely different. It feels in Voltron like she's hoping to have something pay off, but we don't know what. And the idea that she wants to get in close enough to hit, and it works out that being swung at just mathematically works. Whereas in GoLion, the intent is basically to want to accurately ram in a way that will hurt and mean that they're no longer around. I'm going to be that blunt about it. She's willing to do that, like he said. Someone else who wants to fight for the Galra, and she's showing it. She's like, "I will put my life on the line for my people," even though this clearly means not getting. If you were to put the Voltron spin back on it, then she wouldn't get back for the codes or anything else. So here, but their only motivation is get back at the Galra at any cost. And so that's really, I think, why Ryu doesn't question her. It's like, we already know that they're lockstep and that's their motive. And so they just go. Whereas in Voltron, they had to kind of give an explanation. And like you said, they set it up for a payoff that makes total sense. Not only with the episode itself, but with Sven's emotional arc of, where's my value? What can I do?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, and again, kudos to Mark Handler for laying all these pieces out in a logical way that builds Sven's character. He does have a definite arc in this episode. And finding those opportunities to drop in the appropriate dialogue in the lip flap that already exists in an episode that has a completely different context is not an easy feat. So mega, mega kudos to Mark Handler for pulling that off.
Yeah. So what we see now, as a result of this maneuver, the crown falls off of Voltron's head, and now they're free of the energy ropes, and Voltron breaks free of the Iron Maiden and flies off. Keith says, "Now let's go." And as soon as he says that, you see Voltron pull back, and Keith says, "Form blazing sword." They form blazing sword. The Iron Maiden raises her arms and her two clawed forearms towards Voltron. Voltron descends into the scene and cuts with the blazing sword into the one claw and then into the other. The claws explode. Keith yells as Voltron's sword slices into the scene, and then basically they cut through the whole Iron Maiden, and it falls apart into pieces, right?
Yeah.
In a fiery explosion. And Keith says that's the end of the Iron Maiden.
GoLion, the scene in terms of the action is exactly the same. The dialogue is a lot less. It's just basically after Voltron is freed, Kogane says, "Okay, here goes," joking, and summons the sword, and then they defeat it. There's no more dialogue than that. There's none of that. That's the end of the Iron Maiden kind of stuff.
And there's a second piece to this where some of the things fly off and hit a couple of Lotor's ships, and those explode as well. And Lance says, "and Lotor's robot ships."
Yeah, the same thing happens in GoLion. The pieces of the Goddess of Hell destroy a bunch of the Galra ships, and Syncline gets away.
And Keith says, "Well done, team." That's the end of that scene there, and now we go back to Planet Eris.
Except it's actually Pollux. The script says Eris, but it's very clearly Pollux.
Okay.
Yeah, visually totally clear. I mean, obviously, I say obviously, but from GoLion, because we've been pressing that she's been trying to get back to her own planet. That always confused me when I watched it. I'm like, this doesn't feel like they're back on Eris. Where are they? And then I realized in the rewatches, that's Pollux architecture.
Yeah.
Now, this episode never says where they're actually going. It's in the description of the setting in the script that says it's Eris. But visually, it's definitely Pollux.
Okay. Keith says, "Well done, team, Sven, Ramel, and everyone." And then you see the crowds cheering, "Hooray for Voltron, hooray for Princess Ramel and Prince Bandor, hooray." And then you see Bandor meet up with Ramel, and Bandor says, "Ramel." And Ramel says, "Bandor, we're home at last, and our people are safe." And then you see Keith meeting Sven, and Keith says, "My friend." And Sven says, "Keith, I'm going to stay here with Ramel." And Ramel meets up with Allura, and Ramel says, "Cousin." And Allura says, "Ramel." And then Bandor says, "Two princesses together." And then Sven says to Keith, "She gave me back my life." And Keith says, "I'm glad, Sven." And then Keith says, "And remember, you'll always be a part of the Voltron force. So if you ever need us back here on Planet Pollux, just call us. We'll be waiting for you." Now that's what
dialogue is the only place they handle, and that's the point. They got the dialogue right, but the scene call is Eris.
Yeah,
what?
That was strange for them to call the scene on Eris, but then use the dialogue to say it's Pollux.
So here's a hunch. In a lot of Voltron scripts, especially the early ones, characters get named one thing and then they get renamed later. And you'll find that they will only update, because it's a typewriter that this stuff was typed on back in the day. They would just type up the new revised dialogue and literally paste it in the script, but leave the original draft of all the non-dialogue references. So I'm trying to remember. They were Zarkon and Lotor had different names initially, and I don't remember what those names were off the top of my head. I think Malvor might have been Lotor's name. I can't remember, but whatever the case, they'll often update just the dialogue, and I think that's what happened here. They wrote something with the intent of it being Eris, and then oh wait, that's not Eris, and just updated the dialogue.
I got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the end of the Voltron episode. And to wrap up the GoLion episode, we're back on Heracles now.
Okay.
And I'll just skip ahead to the reunion. I'll skip all the stuff that the people are shouting and cheering. Princess Amu says, Prince Allure, and Allure says, sister. And they reunite. Kogane, Keith says, my friend, exactly like in Voltron. Ryu then says, friend indeed. Together we'll defeat Galra. So he's probably not staying, but he doesn't say one way or the other, really. Amu reunites with Princess Fala. She says, Princess Fala. Fala says, Princess Amu. Our planets are sisters. I think that's Allure saying that, Bandor. Then finally, the last lines here are Ryu saying, yeah, today's the first step in, and then Kogane finishes our Galra assault. And then they say, there's now another hero in the fight against Galra. His name is Ryu Shirogane, and that's the end.
Nice.
So we kind of did this ad hoc. I don't think I didn't have any preconceptions of how we were going to do this, but I think the back and forth hopefully illustrated the stark contrast between these two episodes. With that in mind, what did you guys think of these two episodes?
I will say that while I've said that both work, I think that overall I still feel the greatest gut punch from the GoLion version, simply because of what's at stake. The idea that the younger brother learning the older one is dead. I mean, it's weird. I watched it I have that disc, but I don't watch it as often as I watch the Voltron material. Maybe that's because I've watched it more with the Voltron material, but I'm nearly brought to tears watching the GoLion version, where it's like the emotional investment in the writing is good in the Voltron version, but it wasn't eliciting the same level of emotion in me, and I was like, why? Is it just frequency and redundancy? I mean, it's because we just talked about it throughout. It is not bad writing. It may just be that GoLion wasn't fresh to me, but I definitely feel that in the way that the script was handled, given what the Voltron team was up against, it is probably one of the strongest scripts out of the entire season, that first year. Where when I look at season 3, and this one Mark also happens to have written, I think the Traitor stands head and shoulders above the others in that group. And it's interesting because it deals with a slightly darker theme of essentially your soldier with PTSD. And it's interesting that in both of those cases, some very darker themes are pushed. And when you look at that, and when you look at it with, not in the comparing of the two shows, but just looking at it within all the Voltron episodes, I think it's pretty stellar.
And I have to say, I'm upset that there was no wedding.
Yeah, I have to come back to that. I'm like, okay, there's two ways I can take that. It was kind of meant as a carryover, because Lotor references the fact that, oh, she wouldn't marry me, but she ran off with him.
Yeah.
I've had to look at that multiple ways coming into this podcast, now that I know the title of this show. I mean, when I was making my notes back in the day, it was the Omega Comet Part 3, because that's what we called them. We didn't know, like Omega Comet 1, 2, and 3.
The episode titles were never displayed in Voltron.
No.
Exactly.
We learn about them only through the DVD releases and stuff like that. But anyway, please continue.
Right.
I'm sorry.
No problem. That's very important. To make sure everybody understood what I was saying. But now to see this, the only thing I can think of is that it's the tongue-in-cheek idea. Now, we know how GoLion ends, but we know how we know what they wind up doing in Voltron Season 3. I'm not going to do any spoilers. Not that that got to a wedding, but still no spoilers. You remember when I described Sven and Romel's bickering at one point like an old married couple? It's
Uh-huh.
almost like it's tongue in cheek
Yeah.
that they would eventually be the royal wedding. The idea that it's about their chemistry. That's the only thing I can think that it means.
Yep.
It could.
And it's still being like a prediction. It doesn't mean that there'll be a royal wedding in this episode.
Right?
That's a good point. That's a really good point. And in fact, Voltron does not directly address the feelings that Sven and Rommel have for one another until that third chunk of episodes. So it's never addressed specific, out in the open. So maybe it does happen off screen after the show ends. But yeah, I agree that the GoLion episode sets the stakes up in a much bigger way. It's very clear that the show is building towards something big. And Voltron doesn't have it doesn't have that kind of story momentum. It never does, really, even though there is a wrap up to this chunk of episodes, and then they move on with these episodes like none of the wrap up ever really happened. But again, this is them adapting as they went. So I'm not excusing it, but rationalizing that there probably wasn't a whole lot of foresight into how far ahead they were going to need to write. And they were probably also madly writing the next chunk of episodes. They were probably having those animated as they were working on these. So with all that going on, I can't imagine they were trying to think of a way to wrap up the story when they were in the process of writing episodes that basically persisted the status quo. But with that said, I still think that while GoLion, yes, has the bigger stakes and you feel the build up, in Voltron you don't so much. I do love Sven's character arc, and I really think that it was not a small feat to pull that off. And I do think that while Ryu Shirogane has an interesting arc of his own in the next, the 10 or so episodes that follow, I find Sven's story to be really compelling. And so I really enjoy that in the Voltron story. Mark, did you have any other words you wanted to add?
I just wanted to also mention the fact that this was made for kids in
Yep.
Voltron, and it's amazing, that kids didn't, get affected by this, because there was some pretty serious adult themes in this, despite the fact that it was edited.
Yeah.
And you can't just think, wow, this is definitely a kid's show. Yeah, no, it's not. It's not.
Yeah. I really I've said it numerous times in this recording session here, but I big time take my if I were wearing a hat, I would take it off to Mark Handler for pulling off this episode. I think the previous two were really cool in their own way, and really, it was, the stakes were high, a lot of tension and all that. This one was very character driven, and to impart that on an episode again that had such a different context, it blows my mind. I really think he pulled a rabbit out of his hat for this episode. So if you're out there, Mark Handler, thanks again. You did a great job.
And forming Voltron was way on the bottom of all the plot lines of this episode. I mean, okay, yeah, it fought a roe beast and defeated it and everything, but wow, that was just so minimal compared to everything else.
True. It rocked. I liked both episodes very much.
One other thing I'd like to get into real quick is, because I know we've talked about looking at ramifications over the 40 years, and I know that roughly a year ago, I think, now, maybe 9 months, Jeremy Correa and Tara reviewed Sven's return in Voltron Force for Ghost and the Lion.
Mm-hmm.
And that got me thinking about how we talk about how that show is, at the very least, a spiritual successor, if not a direct successor. In every pretty much every iteration of Voltron, though I'm not sure how to handle the third dimension in this discussion, but we'll leave it aside. There is some force that's identified that's special or important. In the case of looking at Sven in Voltron Force, they say it's the bite that he got from the cat that we've discussed, from that very early episode here, that then gets reinfected because of Hegarium in it. But Hegarium is not a concept in the original show. The concept idea of like what fuels the Robeast, what's the important thing to have. Obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, but Mayhax is dealing with the this Hagar essence and doing different things with it. And so now I've got to go, okay, how is Hegarium all the way back here? That one I had to like stop and think about, because the pivotal force in the original series, which comes up toward the end, is actually Lazon, or Lazone as it gets pronounced in one of the episodes. And that's largely because Sven is saying it, and I think everybody's mirroring his pronunciation. But when it shows up later, it's Lazon, and it's spelled out in the script that I've seen as Lazon. So I'm going to assume Lazon is correct. And that shows up coming up in episode 245, One Princess to Another. And the events of that are actually, there's an episode in season 3 that is actually a direct successor to that, which is 305 The Traitor. I just figured that out about a week ago. So where I'm leading with that is, then I had to wrap around my head, if the two are connected, is there, we know from in the original series that Lazon is supposedly radioactive and that they mine it, whereas Hegarium is a magical essence. And so I had to fight with myself, okay, how do I reconcile those two? And then the fact that it looks like the doctors on Ebb healed them. Maybe what they saw was the Lazon component of it, and they healed the Lazon part of it, and so, like healing somebody from a radiation problem, and everybody thought he was cured. But maybe the cat had some semblance of both, and because it's like, otherwise, what did the doctors on Ebb treat him for? What would have been from their handbook if nobody knows what Hegarium is? Sorry, this is literally because of some other work that I've been doing. This is just some stuff that I thought was worth noodling on to share. And obviously, Quintessence is the mirror from Legendary Defender. But it's just an interesting thing to think about. The fact that you've got the Lazon in this show and Hegarium in the other show doesn't necessarily rule out all of this making sense if you want them to be in the same canon. Sorry if that feels like it was a little bit off a tangent track, but
I think that's such a fun thing to think about. I had not thought any of that through. It's a pretty fascinating thought. I feel like when I'm like I actively watch Doctor Who still on Disney now in the US, and seeing all these little hints dropped along the way and trying to figure out how the season's going to end. I feel like you're using your headcanon to fill some gaps there that will never really be filled, but
Exactly.
It's fascinating to think that through. So I love that. That's cool.
And you don't think Jeremy and Todd Garfield thought about those things?
Well, they might. Who knows?
well, just I went back and watched that entire review before coming into this one, and it seemed like Jeremy admitted that they thought stuff out to the extent that they could, or that one, no, honestly, that one remembers, because like I was saying, this is the connection between this episode 245 and 305. I literally saw a week ago. It should have been in my face for a long time, me who usually knows a lot about lore.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been several other things that have come out of this in the last 6 months on this other project that I've been working on. Like, how did I go nearly 40 years and not see these other things? In the case of Voltron Force, how did I go X number of years and not stop and think about that question? Because that question should seem obvious to me, but You can tell sometimes I have too much time on my hands to think about these things.
You have a new
They're
perspective now that you never had before.
Right.
awesome stuff. I love it. Keep on keeping on with that. That's great.
Yeah.
This definitely, I'm glad that we got to finally fit this in this year for a number of reasons.
Hmm.
But most specifically because the show's been around for 40 years and the character of Sven has clearly, Tara is just one example, has clearly impacted so many people. It makes it completely evident that to combine the brothers into the one character was the right call for the show and the right call for the character. And that's what I really
Yeah.
wanted to bring that back to when I was referencing Voltron Force.
Yeah. A fair comment, and I agree 100%.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I'm glad that we now returned to Voltron, Defender of the Universe, for this podcast.
Yeah, so it was really nice taking some time during this 40th year anniversary of Voltron, Defender of the Universe, the original 1984 show, and being able to take one of those episodes and review it again for, all of the listeners out there. So thank you for hanging on with us for this little segue from Voltron Force back to Voltron Defender of the Universe, where we'll have to go back to Voltron Force again.
Yep, we got, I think, 4 episodes left to cover, and
Yes.
we will get them done this year, by golly. All right.
Fantastic.
Shannon, thanks again for
Yes.
joining us, for helping us cover this cool episode.
Thank you for having me, as always.
Yeah, it was a blast. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. Thanks. And we'll see you all next time on
Let's Voltron.